Welcome to episode 2 of the A Zone. Tonight we've got myself, Connor Knudsen, Matt Chua,
Hello.
Calvin Trone, and Coy Nguyen.
Hello.
Today we're going to talk about red dots versus iron sights when it relates to pistol shooting. So I think we all have a pretty unique experience with that recently. So Calvin and I are primarily production shooters or usually using iron sights. And Matt being a carry optic shooter primarily and Coy shooting open primarily, they're used to using red dot sights. But we all have experience, at least some experience with both. So we're going to talk about that and talk about, how to use them, the best ways to train with them, whichever one you're not used to and vice versa. So let's get started. First question we have is, let's go around the circle and talk about all of our individual experience with dots just briefly. So Matt, you're off.
I've been shooting with red dots for approximately 2 years. So I did a little bit of open using carry gun, and then like 5 months later, I switched over to a carry optics gun. So been shooting carry optics ever since.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Calvin, tell us about your experience shooting a dot.
So my first time really using a dot was at Scott Jetlinski's class. That's the Modern Samurai project. I used a borrowed Glock there, but then I didn't really touch a dot again until maybe a year later. And there was a time last year where I played around with the Glock 19X with an RMR on it. And then I also played with Coy's Tampa, what's that thing called? The Lim Pro? Yeah, the Lim Pro with a dot on it. So I've shot carry optics on and off, but I've never really stuck with it for very long.
All right, thank you. And Coy.
So in USPSA, I've probably shot a dot 3 out of 4 years in carry optics, PCC, and open. So mostly dots.
Awesome. And so for me, I shoot production primarily. And recently, a couple months ago, I guess, got some carry optics guns. So that was really my first dabble into shooting a dot. And I trained with a few thousand rounds before I temporarily switched back for production. But in that few thousand rounds, I think I learned a lot, and it kind of opened my eyes to all the things I have yet to learn. So exciting stuff. But all right, thanks, guys. Off to the next question. So when shooting a dot, there are obviously some differences with irons. So what do you think are the key factors for shooting a dot well? Or in other words, what do you think you have to do to fully take advantage of the advantages that a dot provides? So we'll just go around in the same order. Let's start with you, Matt.
Shooting key factor for shooting a dot well. One of them could be maintaining focus out to the target or targets. Like if you keep on switching your vision back and forth between like the plane that your gun is in out to where the target is, you're going to lose all that efficiency because the dot's not going to be in the actual focus, and you're not focusing on what you should actually be looking at.
Cool. Yeah, I like that. So you're saying like if you're shooting a dot focused on the dot, you're not really getting the benefits of the dot.
You're not going to get any benefit at all.
There you go. Yeah, I agree. So do you have any recommendations for if someone finds out that they're doing that or they think they're doing that? Do you have any recommendations for someone to evaluate themselves on how well they're focusing on the target? And if they are focusing on the dot, what do you think they should do about it to fix it?
We've heard multiple different things. I just simply tell people it's a lot like trying to figure out where you're driving or looking to what the next thing on your computer screen is. You just simply look to that spot that you want to go. Some people have been playing around with like there's those optic covers, or you just put like a piece of painter's tape on your dot. Some of us who run a thumb high kind of grip on your sport hand, that actually blocks your opposite eye vision. So you're not necessarily going to get a benefit out of the tape or cover if you have that kind of grip. So I'm just going to tell people, look to the spot where you want to go, shift vision. That's how you're going to work on target focus.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's good advice. All right, Calvin, you're up. And just to repeat the question, we're talking about key factors for shooting a dot well.
I think before we even get into like target focus and dot focus or front sight focus, whatever, like before we even get into that conversation, I think learning the index of your gun is like key to even using a dot properly. Because like most people, especially early on when dots were just becoming like popular, people were buying them and they were fishing for the dot when they presented the gun. So that tells you if you have to fish for the dot, that means you didn't develop the index. That means like remembering the relationship between your hands and the gun and your body and your eyes to point the gun exactly what you're looking at without having to like search for the dot. And that's a skill that is developed. And like I had a pretty decent index with my Tanpo, and and when I switched to a Glock for carry optics, I went through what a new shooter would go through, like having to relearn that index, and it is a pretty frustrating process. And I can see why someone new may feel discouraged from doing it because I mean, me as an experienced shooter, I was a master class production shooter, and it still took me like a solid like 2 weeks of dry fire just to get somewhat comfortable with an entirely new gun.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think related to that for me, I always thought like you see the guys at matches that draw and then they're doing the like wiggle the gun around, try to find the dot deal. I always thought this is gonna sound mean, so I'm sorry, but I always thought that was reserved for like the B class dudes that never practice or whatever, right? And so I was always like, oh, look at that guy, he doesn't dry fire. Well, when I started shooting it, and bear in mind, my dot guns were the exact same guns that I shoot for production, just the optic ready version with the dot on the top. And the dot does sit a little higher than the irons though. But when I first got mine, and not a B class dude, I'm not great, but I'm not terrible either. I'm had a similar problem. It took maybe 15 or 20 minutes of dry fire to just get that index down. But the weird thing that bothered me was I dry fired pretty heavily, and then in matches had a couple instances where it was always shooting on the move or lean. I had the dot either out of the window or very close to out of the window, like scary close. So for me, like that index, you think you have it, but the index issues kind of pop up when you're in awkward shooting positions or shooting on the move or something. That was unexpected for me. So I think that's a really good recommendation, even if you're relatively experienced. Is that something you can probably always improve? And so I know that the two guys here that shoot dots all the time probably don't have that issue very much anymore. But even if you're an experienced shooter, it can pop up. But yeah, good.
Yeah, that happened to me.
What's that?
So that happened to me quite a bit when I was shooting that Glock. Every time I was in an awkward position, I pretty much would lose the dot.
Yeah, it was very unexpected for me, but I definitely experienced that. Well, cool. Thank you. So Coy, key factors to shooting a dot well. What you got for us?
Calvin jacked mine, so I don't really have anything to add. Index is really it. I think the way you described it, like, I mean, you don't suck at shooting, obviously, but when the sight is like an inch higher, it totally ruins you. And most guns, like people want to get into it for like cheap, and we're not really here to talk about gear or whatever, but people want to get into it for decently cheap. So you go like buy like a obvious like optic ready model. But what they're not saying is your optic is also going to be an inch higher off the gun than your iron sights are, and that's a totally different gun at that point.
But okay,
So,
cool.
Connor,
Well, thank you guys.
I have a question for you with your Shadow 2 optics ready. Since the optic sits higher than your iron sights, how has your shooting position changed? Do you lift the gun up to your eye more, or do you bring your head down to the gun?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think you and I have talked about this a little bit offline. So I'm glad you brought that up. I think I'm trying to bring my hands slightly lower when I present the gun, so that I don't think my head position is changing. Disclaimer: I don't know what's right or wrong in this situation, but I'm pretty sure that's what I'm doing. But what about you?
I do the exact opposite. I actually I lift my head up a little bit more. So it's almost like using an AR-15 with like a tall mount. So I have that position when I shoot with a red dot gun. And with iron sights, it's not drastic, but my head is a little bit further down. And I've actually found the red dot, like transitioning to a red dot on the same model of gun, is not nearly as difficult as like switching guns completely. I thought the transition from my Tanfo stock 3 with irons to with the red dot when I borrowed Koi's slide, like I thought that was like seamless almost.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I haven't really played around with different models of guns, particularly ones that like have a different like grip shape. So I don't really know personally, but I can totally see that, and that was one of the reasons I. For people that don't know, I shoot a Shadow 2 in production, and then I got the Shadow 2 for carry optics as well, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to do that was in addition to like mag compatibility and crap like that, I wanted to not have to learn a new gun at the same time as trying to learn how to shoot with a dot. But okay, and I guess so it's my turn, so I'll make this brief. I agree with what all you guys said. Additionally, I think one of the key factors for me coming from Iron Sight was learning what level of like dot confirmation you need for different types of targets. And what I mean by that is if it's like a close, wide open target, you probably can just get away with seeing like the target through the lens and not even really worrying about the dot that much. But if it's something like a steel plate at 15 yards, you might need a relatively like still stable dot and everything in between there. And so that was something that I think I kind of through experience and experimentation figured that out with irons, but I pretty much needed to refigure it out completely with the dot just because it's so much different than irons. You're not looking at obviously metal blocks lining up. You're looking at just one point, which makes it substantially easier once you figure it out. But I need to just figure it out. But okay, cool. Those are all good answers, guys. So next question up. What do you think the hardest part of switching between a dot and iron sight is? And so if you normally shoot dots, then I'd like to hear what do you think's hardest about maybe shooting a match or a practice session with irons, and then vice versa for those of us that normally shoot irons. So we'll again go in the same order if you don't mind. That means Matt, you're up.
Why the hell do I have to start?
We want to hear what you have to say.
Of course you do. Let's see. So in my case, switching from a dot to iron. So basically, for me, I maintain target focused all the time. So the irons stay pretty fuzzy compared to my target. So it's really just adding in one extra piece, like one extra aiming device. So I'll somewhat see the rear sight, I'll somewhat see the front sight, but I'm still primarily focusing on the target. And then for me, it's just I bring, in comparison between my dot gun to my irons gun, I'll bring the gun up a little bit higher to my eye. That's what I do.
Okay, gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. Thanks. So next up, we got Calvin. You normally shoot irons for the people that don't know. So I want to hear, your thoughts on shooting a dot every once in a while.
So when I do switch to a dot, or when I have switched to a dot, the hardest thing for me is taking the information I can see and being able to react fast enough. I feel like I can't make my body like act as quickly as I can see the information in front of me. So what will happen is I will draw the gun, point at the target. Oh, the red dot's on the target. Oh shoot, that happened really fast. I should probably pull a trigger. And then it's like, oh wow, the gun like recoiled. I saw the dot go lift and come back down. It's like, oh, I can pull a trigger again because it happened so fast. And then like next thing, you go to the next target, and the whole process happens over and over again. To where I can see all these things, but I'm not used to moving my body and pulling the trigger and like making all these decisions that quickly. If that makes sense. I'm trying to think of how I can put that into words. I see just so much stuff and everything happens so fast, I'm like not ready for it. That was my like first impression of the dot when I started using it. And even now, it's still like I still catch myself doing that every once in a while, where I can see all this stuff, but I just can't react fast enough.
All right, thank you. So Koi, normally shooting with a dot. I know occasionally I think you shoot with irons, and you definitely shot production in the past. So what are your thoughts on the hardest thing shooting irons?
It's actually the reverse for me now of what we just talked about. So the index ends up being too low most of the time. And so if you're retarded like I am, then you like shoot over the top of the sights, which I mean can kind of work for close-up stuff because it doesn't really matter what you see. Because you kind of point your arms intuitively without visual assistance. But obviously it doesn't work out if you have to shoot hard stuff. So that's probably the biggest thing, to like be patient and I guess dry fire, those little nub things, whatever those are.
The hardest part is dry fire.
Yeah.
Same. All right. Well, that's a good one. So for me, I again, kind of reflect everything you guys said. I'll add one thing that's I guess this isn't strictly shooting with a dot, but for me personally, the hardest part was I guess using the dot to the fullest advantage. And what I mean by that is at matches, doing the things that the dot allows you to do in order to stay competitive on time with the other guys at your approximate skill level. So for example, if you go watch people shoot carry optics, they have a very different style of shooting in production, and it's I think, well, maybe half and half, a lot because of the dot, and maybe also a lot because they're using 140 millimeter magazines. But you'll see them kind of just walk through stages and almost take, you know, sometimes literally everything on the move. And that was an uncomfortable thing for me. And it is substantially easier to do that with the dot. But it was definitely a big adjustment for me. And once you practice it, you realize what you can kind of get away with. But coming from production where there are definitely opportunities to shoot on the move, but you don't do it as much because you need to do more reloads, and also it becomes a little bit harder with the iron sights. So I was definitely not used to that, but that was a fun learning experience as well. Well, cool.
And the
All
nice
right,
thing about
so
carry optics, oh,
go ahead, please.
I was like you are penalized less for taking makeup shots because you have so many rounds in your magazine.
Yeah, and so I think that it's an interesting thing combining that with the dot because you can get away with a lot more, and I think be a lot faster, particularly on difficult targets like pieces of steel, or you don't want to just like send hopers at like no shoots and stuff. But like with pieces of steel and things like that, you can be a lot faster, and then it's kind of a double whammy because you also usually have at least 5 makeup shots, if not way more than that, from any given position. So I think they tend to go quite a bit faster. And a lot of times they're not using all of those makeup shots, to be clear, especially not the top guys. But like, they're really moving. And that was kind of a culture shock for me. And I still haven't really fully grasped it, but kind of jumping in the deep end, I think was valuable for my learning. And by jumping in the deep end, I mean going out to matches with, locally we have some pretty solid M-class dudes in carry optics, as well as namely like Dazi, who's a grandmaster local to us in carry optics. So that was quite good for my learning, I think. Okay, so following that, we've talked about the key factors of shooting a dot well. We've talked about the tough things to work on when you're shooting a dot. So as well as irons if you normally shoot a dot. So now I think what I want to ask everyone is, what are the best drills to shoot if you're going to switch your sights, either temporarily or just make the switch? So if you're an iron sight shooter and you just bought a carry optics gun, what would your recommended drills be to go out and do? And then also vice versa, if you're normally a dot shooter and you want to go shoot a match in production or something, what drills do you think are valuable to do prior to that?
One reload, one.
Yeah, always just one reload. That's the answer. Like we answered this last time, guys. It's just one R1. But no, for real. So Matt, we'll start with you again. What do you think? So your favorite drill, if you could only pick one, one for switching 2 irons and one for switching to a dot.
Oh,
It can be the same.
Let's see here. Now that the Zoom message is off my screen. One for the dot, one for irons. I think both of them you could do accelerator and then just change the target distances from each other in the horizontal plane. That way you work some distant transitions between targets. That way you have some kind of changing gears focus as well.
Cool. Yeah, I like that. That's just a good drill in general, and I think that's actually one of the ones I did. Not the first time, but I did it when I started shooting with a dot, and I think it was pretty valuable. So Calvin, you're up. What you got?
I mean, practically speaking, the only difference between like shooting with the dot and shooting with irons is the vision. So any drill where you have targets that are different sizes and then also different distances, so you have like different focus depths, that's going to be beneficial, I think. So like accelerator is one of them. And for those of you who don't know, accelerators, you have a full-size USPSA target, one at what 17, or sorry, one at 7 yards, one at 15 yards, and one at 25 yards. They're spaced 1 yard wide from each other. And you fire 2-2-2, reload 2-2-2 in any order. The other one that would be good is distance change-up. So you have a full-size USPSA target at 5 yards, and then 15 yards you have a head box, basically a target with a no shoot. And then again, 5 yards. So you have 3 targets with a 15-yard target in the middle. And then that gives you a large target and then also a really difficult target that's at different focus depth than the close ones.
Yeah, that I agree. Those are good ones. What do you think? One or two of your favorite drills, Coy? What you got? Specifically for switching to a dot or iron.
So I don't think there are any shooting specific ones because aiming's not really shooting, I suppose. So maybe I totally misread the question, but
No.
I'm gonna use a science word, so bear with me. I'm not a science person. Proprioception, I guess, knowing where your extremities are. So I don't know how to really describe this, but like you take aim at something and like you close your eyes and feel like where your arms are, and then you kind of like reset your body, whatever, and then you just try to achieve that position again, but with your eyes closed. And you open your eyes and it's like, hey, did you make it? If not, then I gotta go up, I gotta go down, I gotta, make whatever adjustments. I think intuitively achieving that position is super important, and that's probably the only like dot versus irons thing.
Okay, cool. So I think would you say that maybe also like heavily relates to the learning the index as well?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, I
Yeah, in
like
the
all
bullseye
the.
world.
Go ahead. Sorry.
So in the bullseye world, they call that natural point of aim. So all you guys who like learned how to shoot the old way from like forever ago, that's the same thing. Natural point of aim.
Cool. So I again, I'll agree with everything y'all said. For me, if I had to pick one drill, and I think this one drill, I would say is really good whether you're going to the dot or to the irons, being used to one or the other. Mine is probably the standard exercise crisscross. I've been doing that a lot in the past year, and I think it has a lot of the same attributes as accelerator and as distance changeup. And so for those who aren't familiar, it's a standard exercise setup. So you have 3 targets at some given distance, like 7 to 15 yards is pretty common. But they're all next to each other at the same distance, and they're just 3 open USPSA targets. And the procedure is to draw and fire 2 shots on the body of one target, one of either the left or the right one, then 2 shots on the head of the middle target, and then 2 shots on the body of the remaining target. Then mandatory reload, and then you do 2 shots on the head, 2 shots on the body in the middle, and 2 shots on the remaining target's head. So when you're done, you should have shot 2 in all of the heads and 2 in all of the lower A zones as well. And you know, similar to accelerator and distance change up, it has you switching aiming points between, you know, a relatively easy to a relatively hard target. And you know, I think the cheat codes for success at that drill are being target focused and knowing the exact level of sight confirmation you need, particularly for the headshots, that you can get away with and still get decent hits, so that you don't waste time and you break the shot right away. So that I think is a really good drill. Another one, I think, if I had to pick a second one, would be maybe this is from the practical shooting training group forum. Is they call it designated target, and so you pretty much just set up a random array of whatever targets you want at various distances, various target types, however you want, and you pick one to be designated, and then you know, go to each target from that designated target. So in between every other target, you go back to the one that you picked and just fire 2 shots on each. And you just transition between all the targets, and it really helps you work transitions and aiming, I think, with a sight that you maybe aren't familiar with, and it'll help you get familiar with it.
I got another thing for regardless of whether you got dots or irons. I forget what it's or the drill exercise is called, but what you'll do is that you'll aim at a specific spot on a target, but you're not necessarily, let's just say like my head is the lens of your red dot optic, and so you'll put your dot aimed on that center of the target, like all the way at the edge of the glass, and like you're trying to figure out exactly what you can get away with. In my experience, you don't see much of a difference between up close out to 25, but you possibly will start seeing something out to like 35, 50 yards. And you can even try this with irons, like, hey, what is my shot going to be if I raise it just a little bit out of the notch, if it's touching one side of the rear sight, that kind of thing. So seeing what you can get away with as well is an important part of dots or irons. It's an acceptable sight picture for that target kind of thing.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I've done that with irons before, but I've never tried it with my dots, and that was probably a big oversight on my part. But I'm definitely going to try that now that you bring that up. That's a good idea.
So like the goal, like the goal that you need to understand there is you do not have to have the dot perfectly within the center of your lens.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, and I think I was kind of like aware of that, but and I think most people are aware of that. But for anyone listening, I think, at least for me, there's a big difference between being aware of something and then like actually going and doing it. And I don't know, it kind of just connects things in my brain when I do it like that. So that's a really good recommendation that we hadn't thought of. Thank you. Well, cool. If no one else has anything, our next, this is our final question on the agenda for today, at least that we came up with. So we're gonna go around. I want to hear, what are the downsides to a red dot sight, if there are any?
It's just money. That's it.
Okay, so Matt says money. He's also the one that last time told us budgeting didn't matter, people. So I don't know. He's giving us mixed signals here. I think what he's saying is just to, you know, like your huge stash of primers, just put the optics on a credit card and forget about it.
Oh yeah. Like, look, do you just want to buy $100 irons, or do you want to buy $500 optic? Come on.
I mean, yeah, if you're putting it on a credit card and just forgetting about it, then give me the optic, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I do.
That's what you did.
Okay,
yeah.
But in all seriousness, the cost is definitely a downside. That's a good point. Well, cool. And so Calvin, you got any downsides that come to mind?
I would say the durability. I know everyone on the internet says like 100 rounds, no problems, but there's quite a few dots out there, and even like your major name brands, they still break, like no matter what. That's one of the things that actually kept me away from carry optics for so long. was my first one I bought, the first dot I bought. It only lasted like 3,000 rounds before it quit working.
Yeah, that was
It,
definitely a factor for me too. That I just kind of didn't want to bother with it until the technology matured a little bit. So that's a good point.
I mean, they're a lot better now, but still, I mean, they can still break.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Corey, you're up. Downsides to a dot.
It's kind of between Matt and Calvin's answer, I guess. So I use a dot that's like known to break, and I'm not gonna call it out, but it's the
It
best
rhymes
you
with
can.
big, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Oh gosh, there goes our sponsorship opportunity with Ben and Calvin. Thanks a lot, man.
Our sponsorship, more like your
No one's
sponsorship.
gonna know.
But yeah. You probably need two guns, and not because the guns are gonna break, but because the dots are gonna break, and it turns into a money thing. So that's what I mean by it. It's kind of like both problems.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think for me, the way I was, because I already had two production guns, right? So I was ready for that part. But then you never know. Some of these dots seem like, and this could be like the same model, same make and model. You'll see here one person had issues like under 10,000 rounds, and there are other people that have almost 6-digit round counts on theirs. They're still working, so it seems to be very iffy. But I don't know. It's definitely better. Like Calvin said, it's definitely better than it was a few years ago, and so hopefully it'll just keep getting better and better.
I think there's like a couple of good choices now. So something that's not a downside is that it's pretty obvious what works. But yeah, anyway, it can break. It definitely will break. I've seen literally everything.
Yep. Yeah. So I'll mirror what you guys said. It's definitely a big cost downside because if you're serious about it, then you already have two guns. Well, now you need two, whichever optic. So it just adds cost in that regard. There's also some durability concern, I think, as well. Hopefully, we're mostly past that as far as like the general, well, some of the brands on the market go. And then for me, it was kind of not even just the dots themselves, but I had some issues that was probably at least partially installer error. But I had some issues with like the screws staying tight, and I'm following the instructions to be clear, and stuff like that. So I think it definitely adds some complication to setting up your gun, which is annoying. If you're someone like me, I like really hate doing that stuff. So I think knock on wood, I've got mine figured out now. But there was like substantial frustration in the first couple of weeks that I had them with screws coming loose and stuff like that. So just if you're gonna do it, I would say don't let that keep you from doing it. But I think it is a definite downside versus taking the gun out of the box and not touching the iron sights and never worrying about it.
Having good thread locker and degreasing with acetone is your friend.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that and using a slightly higher torque spec than they told me to were what eventually solved my problems. But that if you definitely have to clean the threads, like Matt said, and like excessive amounts of thread locker.
So what
But
you're saying is mix a lot of red and blue together, right?
yeah, what I actually did was just ground down a bare spot on my slide and on the dot and just welded it on.
Nice.
It's never coming off, yeah. But no, I'm kidding, obviously. But yeah, that was a point of frustration. It's just an annoyance when you're wanting to practice or something. You realize that your dot's a little bit loose or whatever at the range. It's just like very annoying. But okay, I think to be clear, the general consensus. You notice none of us said anything or none of us named any disadvantages that were related to the actual shooting. So I know, like, depending on who you ask, like on the internet or at the gun store or wherever, you can hear people tell you that I don't know. I feel like I've heard that irons are faster on the presentation or for close targets or crap like that. I think someone correct me if you disagree, but I think we're all in agreement that is not even true. So, I think, if you're wondering, it is a clear advantage when you're shooting just all the time. Sometimes it's more of an advantage than others. Like close-up poser targets, it probably doesn't matter as much. But I mean, it's a huge advantage from the shooting. It's just kind of the logistical stuff that you have to do a little extra work with.
I would say irons are faster if you don't train.
Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah.
But otherwise, yeah, the red dots
So,
are
so
pretty much better
What
way.
Calvin's saying is
So-
everyone should just shoot irons because I know this.
what I heard was I need irons for weekend only.
Yes, yeah. Well, I'm gonna be honest. I don't train when it comes to that.
Well, okay,
I am-
Connor, since that's your case, like you have your red dot, but canted off to the side is your 45-degree irons.
Oh, yeah. I need offset irons for my red dot. Oh man, that's pretty tactical. All right. So I think we've beaten that one to death. Let's see. So we actually got some listener questions, believe it or not. I was surprised too. First one we got, and this is actually a good one. Should I cross train on irons if I normally shoot a dot, and vice versa? So if you normally shoot irons, is it worth cross training on a dot? Matt, since you normally shoot dots, I want to hear your answer to that question.
And because I'm first in this session, got it.
That too.
I would cross train, but not within the same session. Otherwise, I think your brain's going to start getting confused upon what you want to accomplish for that session.
Okay, I think that's pretty reasonable. Usually you want to like nail down a few specific things to practice on at a given time, right? So that makes
Yeah.
sense to me.
Yeah, otherwise you're really not going to get the benefit of whatever live fire or dry fire session you're working on.
Cool. Calvin, what's your opinion on this subject, and maybe specifically if people normally shoot dots, since you're more of a production shooter like I am, if people normally shoot dots, would you recommend that they ever, for whatever reason, cross train on irons?
It depends on what their goals are. Like if you are a dot shooter for USPSA and you want to be the best open or carry optic shooter, I don't know how beneficial it is to be switching to irons. Now, if like you are shooting USPSA for fun and you carry an irons gun or you have an irons gun for your job, then that would make more sense. So I don't know, without having like a goal in mind, it's kind of hard to give a recommendation on what to do.
Cool. So it's pretty much depending on what you want. I see. All right, Coy. Do you think iron shooters would benefit from cross training on a dot, or vice versa, if you want to answer it that way?
I'll go with the spicy answer. Only if you're really bad and you don't train. You kind of like skip an unnecessary step, and so you kind of like trick yourself into doing something cool. But I'll just go with what Calvin said. There's really not a point. If you're trying to be good at irons, shoot irons. If you're trying to be good at shooting dots, shoot dots. It's not going to help you at all to shoot irons.
All right. I'm not gonna lie. I'm a little surprised with the answers. And to be clear, I didn't know what y'all were gonna say about this beforehand. So I expected everyone to say there's more value in it than y'all just did. But I'll give my answer, and I'm actually gonna say I do think there's value in it. With the one caveat that I don't think, so like if you're normally a carry optics shooter, I don't think you should sacrifice your like during the season carry optics training to train with irons. Like, like Calvin said, train with your normal gun, try to get good at carry optics. Don't worry about cross training. But if you have extra time, maybe during the off season or something like that, I do think there's some value. I think probably the reason to train irons is just because not as many people know how to shoot irons as they do a dot. So like it's kind of just cool, I guess, to be able to shoot irons relatively well. But I don't know if it's I don't
It's
know
not beneficial anymore.
What?
But then that's not beneficial anymore. It's just for fun.
Yeah, then that's kind of where I was going with this. I don't know if it's really going to help it's definitely not going to help you shoot a dot specifically. And I don't think it's really going to do much for your like shooting game overall. Uh, it's just I don't know. I feel like if you want to be a decent shooter, knowing how to shoot irons is part of that. But I don't think it's going to help you be better at carry optics or open or whatever. The flip side, if you normally shoot production, and so this is kind of the situation I was in. If you normally shoot production and you want to cross train on a dot, I'll say I definitely think that's beneficial. If for no other reason, then that's kind of where things are going. Everyone's shooting dots nowadays. I'm sure you've noticed. So just for the sake of keeping your own skills relevant and chasing where the competition is going, I think you should definitely cross train with a dot. I also think there's some things you can learn it without shooting a dot, but it kind of shooting with a dot kind of facilitates you learning it a little bit easier. And it's not worth it if you're just going to go buy dot guns just for that. It's not worth it. But again, you should probably eventually do something related to a dot just because that's where things are going. But so examples of what I'm talking about would be target focus shooting. It's way easier to do that with a dot. And I think getting your eyes and brain used to that will help you do it more with iron sights as well. Not that you can't learn, you don't have to buy a dot to learn that, but it kind of is just it's a nice to have. Another thing, like I mentioned previously, is shooting on the move and just generally doing things to keep up with the pace of the carry optics, like the top carry optics guys at matches. Again, you can go practice shooting on the move if you shoot production. You can definitely learn that, but you're kind of forced to if you want to stay competitive if you cross train and do a little bit of carry optics, because you just won't be on pace if you don't do that stuff. So for me, it's not like I hadn't practiced that before. It's just I never, the opportunities to do it are less common than they are in carry optics. So if you just kind of jump in and start shooting with a dot and competing in carry optics in particular, then you better do those things if you want to do decent at matches. Whereas in production, you can kind of get away without ever doing matches in a lot of cases. But so that's my thoughts on it. I think I kind of mirror you guys in that it's not as valuable as a lot of people make it out to be. But it is fun.
Wait, okay, I can't. Can you imagine like giving a whole bunch of like Zoomers who are used to the AR-15s with red dots, like giving them iron sights? Like, what percentage of them would even know how to use iron sights? Like,
that's a good question.
I honestly, I don't even think about it because they do stupid shit like putting irons in front of their red dot. So I mean, they get both already. So,
but yeah, I think that's one of the only reasons to learn iron is probably no one even cares anymore, but it's kind of cool if you're good at shooting irons because most people, even that are decent with a dot, aren't good at shooting irons. So I don't know if you care about that type of thing, then maybe you want to train with it, but it won't help you.
the internet cares. Because every time you post something online, like, oh, I could have done that 500 yards with iron sights.
Yeah, and they're obviously all telling the truth and speaking completely accurately. So it's crazy that there's that many amazing shooters on the internet. But okay, I think unless y'all have something else on that topic, we've done that to death now too. All right, last and final question, and we're gonna make this a very quick one. I'm talking like 5 or 6 words or less, and we're gonna go around the circle. And this is a listener question. What dot should I buy? Matt.
The one you can afford.
I like it. Calvin.
Preferably not one that starts in a T and ends in Ruglo.
That was way more than 5 or 6 words, but thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Calvin, you're up.
If you don't know what to buy, just get an SRO.
Corey, your turn.
bar skill 1x30.
All right, I'm gonna have to go with the SRO as well. I like it a lot. All right, guys, that's all we've got today. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for next episode. Send us questions if you have them.
Yay!
I don't know.